Well, Donald Trump's top negotiators have not closed a deal with Russia's president to end his so-called special military operation in Ukraine. U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner sat with Russian President Vladimir Putin in a meeting that lasted nearly 5 hours. A top Kremlin aide says those talks were, quote, constructive and highly substantive. But there are other points that, quote, do not suit us. Putin appears to be accusing Europe of altering the Trump administration's original 28-point peace plan. That proposal had been criticized for appearing to favor Russia. He also said this.
We are not planning to go to war with Europe. I have already spoken about this 100 times. But if Europe suddenly wants to go to war with us and starts, we are ready right now.
Well, shortly after the meeting ended, a top Russian official posted a single word on social media: productive, punctuated by a dove and an olive branch emoji. Well, CNN's Salma Abdelaziz joins us now live from London. Salma, no deal, perhaps no surprise there, but what comes next and what more are you learning about these talks? Nearly 5 hours.
Nearly 5 hours of talks described as substantive by the Russians, but no compromise, no deal. Now, I do want to say that we have no readout from the American side as to how these talks progressed. But from the Russian side, we are hearing positive indications, but of course, no agreement. Now, there's been a lot of concern about how the United States is handling these talks. It seems that President Trump is absolutely desperate for a deal, whereas, of course, Ukraine and its European allies in NATO are saying, hey, slow down. I want you to take a listen to what the NATO Secretary General said just before these talks were about to begin. He was doorstepped in Brussels. Take a listen.
How do we make sure that Ukraine stays as strong as possible? The peace talks are ongoing. That's good. But at the same time, we have to make sure that whilst they take place, and we are not sure when they will end, that Ukraine is in the strongest possible position to keep the fight going, to fight back against the Russians, but also in the strongest possible position when peace talks.
So what do we know? Well, these talks culminated after a week of intensive diplomacy. What was the original 28 plan that was put forward by President Trump was seen essentially as a wish list for President Putin. The Ukrainian delegation met with an American delegation in Geneva shortly after that proposal and essentially pushed for more concessions from Russia. The United States, in the form of Jared Kushner, of course, the president's son-in-law, and the special envoy, Mr. Witkoff, went to the Kremlin with these changes. Now, we don't have any details on exactly what those changes were, what those demands were from Ukraine, but we know in the past that the sticking points have been Russia calling for Ukraine to denounce its aspirations to join NATO, Ukraine also ceding territory in the Donbass, something that's absolutely a red line, and also agreeing to downsize its military potentially, or downsize its aspirations to grow its military in the future. Now, these are, again, red lines for Ukraine, but for President Putin, who seems to be biding his time, there is no issue here in running down the clock. It was only a couple of hours or a few hours, about a day before his meeting with Mr. Kushner and Mr. Witkoff, that Russia claimed the victory of yet another city, Pokrovsk. Now, Ukraine disputes that victory, but very much President Putin, in military fatigues, declaring that victory, using that as an opportunity to show that Russia is not only winning in his mind on the battlefield, but is in no need, essentially, of a compromise. So the next step, what do we wait for next year? Well, first of all, we need to hear from the American side, of course, how they believe this 5 hours of talks went. We need to understand what are the next steps here. Now, one might ask for a direct meeting between President Putin and President Trump, but the Kremlin has indicated the time is not now for that. Rosemary?
Many thanks to Salma Abdelaziz bringing us that live report from London. Appreciate it. Nigel Gould-Davies is a senior fellow for Russia and Eurasia at the International Institute for Strategic Studies. He joins me now from London. Thanks for being with us.
Good morning.
So President Trump's special envoy and son-in-law failed to reach a compromise after nearly 5 hours of talks with President Putin, who made Witkoff and Kushner wait for more than an hour. Putin apparently not happy with Europe's input on the altered peace plan. What did you make of the long talks ending in no deal, and what is Putin's message here, do you think?
Well, firstly, it's possible that more has happened and more has been discussed than so far publicly disclosed. But on the basis of what we now know, it's completely unsurprising to me that these talks have failed and made no substantive progress. There has been a sort of 10 days or so of sound and fury around the 28-point plan, as your reporter was saying, and all of the diplomacy that's followed from that. But the underlying structure of the situation remains entirely unchanged. Russia's fundamental demands and ambitions to subordinate Ukraine remain fundamentally incompatible with Ukraine's continued willingness and ability to resist Russia. And for all of the talks, there's no sign of any movement for compromise on either side. So as much as anything, I think this is a way for Putin to have restated his, frankly, uncompromising positions and to try to hope that America will now impose pressure on Ukraine to make fundamental compromises. I don't think it's likely that Ukraine will do that. I'm just back from 10 days in Kiev, and while the people are weary, they still retain their determination to resist Ukraine and not make compromises that would fundamentally jeopardize their security.
Why do you think U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio isn't present here at these talks instead of Witkoff and Kushner? And did their presence indicate this was more about business deals rather than peace deals?
That's a very interesting question. And if it's a matter of the politics of the Trump administration, well, one has to sort of try to conduct some sort of White House Kremlinology, so to speak, of the different views and the degrees of influence that different factions wield. I think, and partly it's because there's an understanding that Secretary of State Rubio has, let's say, a more orthodox and traditional understanding of the extent to which Russia presents threats to Europe and to American security. And Mr. Witkoff and Mr. Kushner are inherently more willing to see things from Russia's point of view, in contrast to America's longstanding commitments. To your question about the distinction between business deals and peace plans, I mean, it's worth considering whether that really is a distinction, or whether in some sense all of them are bound up together. Because I think the more that we've seen of America's peace plan emerge, and the more that reporters have sort of dug and discovered about what might be going on here, there is a really increasingly alarming sense that one of the drivers of President Trump's policy towards Russia is indeed a determination, an aspiration to reach business deals that may benefit not only America as a whole, but particular companies and individuals that enjoy some access or relationship with this White House. So, and this is something I'm not sure you've ever seen in American foreign policy before. It's geopolitics defined in terms of private corporate interests. That's a very unsettling and new development.
And of course, as you point out, we'll wait to see what the next step is here. Nigel Gould-Davies, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Been fighting so long and so hard that they don't know what the they're doing.